All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into a dense 33-page Hindi study guide to map out the grand, sweeping narrative of human history's interaction with the environment. We're going to explore exactly how we view nature, the massive crises our modern systems have triggered, and the critical path forward if we want to save our planet. Okay, let's dive into this. So, here is our roadmap for today. We've taken this comprehensive guide and broken it down into 5 main themes: environment and ethics, the need for sustainable development, the urban and industrial crisis, the threat to biodiversity, and finally, conservation and public participation. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Environment and Ethics. This is really all about looking at the fundamental moral relationship between us human beings and the natural world. Environmental ethics essentially tells us, hey, we aren't the absolute masters of the Earth, not even close. We are literally just one tiny part of its massive, complex ecosystem. This philosophy argues that nature has intrinsic value. That means it's valuable all on its own, completely regardless of whether we can make a quick buck off it. It also promotes this idea of intergenerational equity, which is just a fancy way of saying it's our moral duty to leave a stable, working environment for our kids and grandkids. And naturally, it stands firmly against the kind of unchecked corporate greed that just violently bulldozes natural habitats. And this brilliantly illustrates a point made by the famous environmental historian Ramachandra Guha. He points out that, especially in developing countries, caring about the environment isn't just some romantic weekend hobby for the wealthy. No, it is a literal crusade for survival. For the rural poor, their everyday livelihoods, their food, their shelter, their water, depend directly on the health of local forests, pastures, and rivers. If the ecosystem collapses, they have nothing. Moving on from the philosophical side of things, we hit Section 2, the highly practical and frankly urgent need for sustainable development. So, how do we actually approach sustainability? Well, historically, it's varied quite a bit. The Western perspective has usually been rooted in science, rational resource management, modern tech, and really strict legal frameworks. Think carbon taxes and emission caps. The traditional Indian perspective, though, it's deeply ecocentric and spiritual. It's based on inner restraint, viewing humans as just one thread in a giant cosmic web. In fact, renowned ecologist Madhav Gadgil points out that ancient Indian concepts like sacred groves, which were forests left totally untouched out of religious reverence, were actually highly effective, scientifically brilliant ways of preserving local biodiversity way before modern environmental laws even existed in the West. Now, to truly understand what we are trying to sustain here, we have to zoom out and look at the macro concept of an ecosystem. This term was actually coined by a botanist named A.G. Tansley way back in 1935. It basically describes the fundamental, functional unit of nature where all living things continuously interact with their physical surroundings. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it breaks down this super delicate web of life. You've got biotic, the living components, right? The producers, consumers, and decomposers. And they are directly interacting with the abiotic, or non-living elements, like sunlight, water, and soil. It's like a giant puzzle. If you damage just one piece, you trigger a dangerous domino effect. The famous historian Arnold Toynbee actually warned us about this. He said human history is basically a constant dialogue of challenge and response with nature, and the survival of our entire civilization absolutely depends on keeping this ecological balance unbroken. But what happens when we completely break that balance? Well, that brings us right to Section 3, the massive urban and industrial crisis that kicks off when our economic systems completely ignore natural planetary boundaries. Modern cities, honestly, act like massive consumption machines that just chew up resources and dump toxic waste right back into our biosphere. We are dealing with air pollution so thick with PM 2.5 it creates choking smog. We've got water pollution from heavy metals totally wiping out marine life, soil pollution from chemicals ruining our farmlands, and even sound and light pollution that severely disrupts human health and local wildlife. Ramachandra Guha actually goes so far as to call this aggressive industrialization a state of ecological warfare. Think about it. Modern industrial centers ruthlessly extract clean resources from rural areas and then just dump toxic waste back. And who bears the worst burden? Always the marginalized populations. And all those emissions, they're artificially amplifying the greenhouse effect. Now, naturally, atmospheric gases trap a little bit of solar heat to keep our planet warm enough to sustain life.
That's a good thing. But since the Industrial Revolution, we've burned so many fossil fuels that we've released unnatural, mind-boggling quantities of carbon dioxide and methane. We've essentially wrapped the Earth in a giant artificial heat blanket. This is the direct cause of global warming and climate change, which is exactly why we're seeing totally erratic monsoons, intense flash floods, and rapidly melting glaciers.
So the crucial point is perfectly captured by renowned thinker Dipesh Chakrabarty. He notes that human beings have literally become a geological force. Let that sink in. Our collective industrial activities are now powerful enough to physically alter the temperature of the entire planet. Author Amitav Ghosh echoes this too, pointing out that our modern economic history has basically ignored the violent power of nature, and it's leading us straight into a systematic planetary breakdown. To give you two really stark examples of this chemical cost, look at acid rain and ozone depletion. When industrial sulfur and nitrogen emissions float up and mix with moisture in the atmosphere, it literally rains toxic acid. This washes away crucial soil nutrients and chemically corrodes historic monuments. It causes what experts call stone cancer on incredible structures like the Taj Mahal. Meanwhile, industrial chemicals like CFCs historically tore gaping holes right through our protective ozone layer, letting in lethal UV radiation. These aren't just isolated flukes, you guys. They show exactly how deep and dangerous our atmospheric damage really goes. And that damage accelerates the next major issue we need to talk about in Section 4, the biological emergency that is actively threatening our biodiversity. It's not just pollution, though. Our native plants and animals are literally under siege from the introduction, sometimes accidental, sometimes deliberate, of exotic invasive plants. Take Parthenium. It's a highly toxic weed that spreads like wildfire and stops local plants from growing. Or eucalyptus. It was brought in for commercial timber, but it acts like a giant, thirsty water pump, completely draining local groundwater tables. And then there's Lantana camara, which literally overruns and chokes the life out of native forests. Madhav Gadgil defines the spread of these species, which are almost always introduced just for short-term commercial profit, as a brutal form of ecological imperialism, where local nature is literally colonized and erased by foreign species. So how does science actually fight this loss of biodiversity? Basically, we use two main strategies to protect the planet's genetic safety net. First is in situ conservation. This means protecting species right inside their natural habitats. Think of setting up huge national parks or wildlife sanctuaries. Then we have ex situ conservation. This happens off-site, where we protect highly endangered species outside their natural homes using controlled environments like botanical gardens, zoos, or even high-tech DNA and seed banks. Which leads us perfectly into our final section, Section 5, Conservation and Public Participation. Because knowing the science is great, but how do we actually implement these solutions in everyday society? Well, managing natural resources doesn't mean we just lock nature away in a glass box and never touch it. It means practicing scientific, careful management. We absolutely need massive afforestation projects to rebuild our carbon sinks. We need check dams to intelligently manage our water, and we need a major shift to organic farming to protect our topsoil. And of course, the golden rule: strict enforcement of the 3 Rs: reduce, reuse, recycle. The eminent historian Didi Kosambi had a great observation about this. He said historical survival always depends on how wisely a society manages its material resources. If you destroy your natural foundation, civilizational collapse is pretty much inevitable. Let's move to and see how this builds into real action on the ground. History proves time and again that top-down, bureaucratic government schemes almost always fail unless the local populations are brought in as active stakeholders. Take a look at the 1973 Chipko movement. Rural women literally hugged trees to physically block commercial loggers. No way were they backing down. This sheer power of the people proves that local, democratic control over resources, like the joint forest management frameworks we see today, is without a doubt the most effective defense system we have against ecological destruction. And these localized strategies, they really have to be adapted to where they are. In rural areas, this means pivoting hard to things like organic farming and community watershed programs to protect local soil and water tables. But in urban areas, preventing internal environmental collapse requires a totally different approach. Cities need to integrate eco-friendly architecture and heavily rely on clean mass transit systems, like the incredibly successful Delhi Metro model, to drastically lower our massive collective carbon footprint. Of course, science provides the literal tools to make all this conservation possible. For example, we're currently using satellites from ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, to track illegal deforestation from space and monitor shrinking glaciers. Down on the ground, green biotechnology is giving us amazing biofertilizers, while environmental engineering provides effluent treatment plants to literally scrub industrial water clean before it ever hits our rivers. And finally, renewable energy tech and advanced EV batteries are giving us the actual means to break our super dangerous addiction to fossil fuels. But all the advanced tech in the world still needs to be guided by basic morality. Mahatma Gandhi was honestly a true pioneer of environmental sustainability, and he beautifully summarized our overarching duty with this super famous quote: "The earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed." His vision of village self-sufficiency, known as Gram Swaraj, was deeply rooted in localized production and, above all else, ecological restraint. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a vital question to ponder the next time you think about your own daily ecological footprint. Are we merely consumers of this earth, just taking whatever we want until it's all gone? Or are we its responsible guardians, actively preparing a stable, healthy home for the next generation? Thank you so much for learning with us today. Keep asking those big questions, and we'll catch you next time.